We're seeing two Canadians being brought back now. Just the one woman, she's been experiencing health issues for quite some time. What was the delay there on hitting that emergency assistance criteria or hitting her out with the criteria being in place?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that we condemn, obviously, in the most unequivocal terms, any support to any terrorist entity, including ISIS. And I did underline yesterday, and will reiterate today, that it is a very serious criminal offense to provide any kind of support to a terrorist entity. And I also pointed out that individuals who break the law will face the full force of it. And today what you are seeing publicly is that the RCMP have laid a number of charges before the court around leaving Canada for that purpose, around participating in furnishing a terrorist activity, the activities of a terrorist group, and participating in a conspiracy for the purposes of aiding and abetting a terrorist group. I've worked with those charges. As a federal prosecutor, I've seen how they play out, and individuals who are charged under the Anti-Terrorism Act, they face very serious penalties. Beyond that, I would point out that when it comes to our policies or our laws, that we place as a paramount value the safety and security of Canadians.
Will Canada be bringing people back who can't yet be charged, or are you going to leave people there until you're in a position to lay these back?
Well, look, it's an important question, and I think it is important to remind folks that we don't talk about individual cases for a number, but we do, and I expanded on this a little bit yesterday, there are principles that we do take a look at around that issue. So we take a look at the nature of the circumstances of whether or not there was any criminal conduct. But again, these are not decisions or choices that are made by elected members of government. We reserve those decisions for police, and for good reason. That is one of the principles on which we divide responsibly the different functions that government fulfills.
Can we expect more people to start coming back now? Are you expecting to see a lot more of this happening in the near future?
Well, again, I won't get into any individual case, but what I will say is that we have a principled framework to undertake those decisions as necessary, looking at a variety of factors, including the severity and the nature of the charges, which may implicate the Anti-Terrorism Act, whether or not there are any vulnerable circumstances that attach to Canadian citizens who do enjoy a right of return. And we do have a framework to take all of those principles into account, but we don't talk about individual cases.
C'est quoi votre cadre décisionnel et est-ce pour le bien des enfants, est-ce que vous devriez rapatrier plus de monde?
Mais comme j'avais juste mentionné, nous avons des paramètres qui examinent tous les principes qui sont impliqués dans cette décision-là. Par exemple, qu'est-ce que c'est les circonstances dans peut-être des charges criminelles qui sont très au sérieux. Mais il faut souligner en même temps que la décision de commencer une inquiétude, de commencer un processus avant les tribunaux de les cours criminels, et décisions qui sont prises dans une façon indépendante par les services policiers. Mais nous avons des paramètres pour chercher le plus bonne décision.
One more question about this, because I know that, as you said correctly, police decide whether to lay charges, but your government decides who to bring home. So would your government bring people home before the police are ready to lay charges and before the prosecutors are ready?
Again, it's a very important question, but I will just highlight that we have in place a framework that allows us to take a look at all of the principles and all of the facts very carefully, very thoughtfully, very deliberately, and at the core of those decisions is always the safety and security of Canadians.
But that doesn't answer Evan's question. No. I understand it's up to police to lay charges or not, or run the investigation, but could the government bring people back before police decides that you should bring them back? In other words, it's your decision at some point to bring them back or not.
Well, look, again, I think you're right to ask the question. My answer to you is that as we undertake those decisions, and as we examine the different principles, at the very core of those decisions is the safety and security of all Canadians.
Concernant la commission au boulot, les policiers ont dit devant le commissaire qu'ils ont encadré la sécurité publique, alors que les résidents d'Ottawa disent qu'ils ont facilité l'installation du convoi au centre-ville. Vous, qu'est-ce que vous pensez que s'est passé? Est-ce que les policiers ont facilité l'installation?
Mais tout d'abord, je pense que c'est très important que le témoignage maintenant est offert à le juge Rouleau qui est là pour un examen avec la transparence transparence devant tout le monde pour comprendre qu'est-ce que c'est la situation, qu'est-ce que c'est les circonstances sur la rue. Et c'est le témoignage, pas seulement de les résidents à Ottawa, mais même partout le pays, qui ont perturbé dans un niveau sans précédent, qui explique pourquoi la décision est nécessaire dans la vie du gouvernement. Et finalement, il faut encore souligner que à la fin de la journée, c'est une décision pour le gouvernement. C'est notre décision et nous avons pris cette décision parce que c'était nécessaire.
Dernière question à propos des enfants, M. Mendicino.
Je vais tourner. Pardon. Je vais
I'm just
tourner.
wondering if you would be able to comment on whether you think parliamentary privilege should excuse politicians from testifying at the inquiry.
I'm not. I'm not going to comment on it because I think it is entirely a decision for the courts to determine. I think it's also a decision for Judge Rouleau to navigate. I know that there's been a summons that has been issued for Premier Ford. I will reiterate, as the Prime Minister has said, that at the end of the day, that the Premier, Prime Minister, our two governments stood with the people who were impacted in ways that were unprecedented. And I'm talking about people, I'm talking about workers, I'm talking about families, I'm talking about vulnerable individuals who needed essential health care. And I'm not just talking about that, I'm talking about the assault on our democracy. Because when you take a step back and you look at how this illegal blockade started, it was started on the back of a napkin with a manifesto that said, we want to take down the government. And we want to take down the government because we disagree with policies around the pandemic. And if the Governor General doesn't force the government to revoke those mandates, then we are going to ask the Governor General to fire the government and replace them with some other concoction that was clearly within whatever the mindset was of those leaders. So it's important to remember what this was all about. Yes, it was about attacking critical infrastructure. It was about attacking people, but it was also an assault on democracy. Pardon.
Je reviens aux enfants. Vous dites que la priorité, c'est la sécurité des Canadiens. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un risque de laisser des enfants-là qui ne représentent pas un risque en ce moment, mais qui se radicalisent là-bas et présentent un plus grand risque?
C'est une bonne question et ça, c'est la raison que nous avons créé une politique qui adressait les vulnérabilités des citoyens qui sont hors de Canada, incluant les enfants, peut-être leur santé, leur situation, et ça c'est un des facteurs qui est inclus dans une décision. Mais encore, je veux souligner que la plus importante chose pour nous est la sécurité et la santé des Canadiens. Merci.
I don't know the exact estimates, but there's obviously still women and children left in these camps in northeastern Syria. Should we expect that there'll be more repatriations in addition to the 4 that have already happened?
Well, first and foremost, obviously we know that Canadians are being detained in northeast Syria, and we are preoccupied with their health and safety, particularly of the children. And so I'm following this situation very closely. I've been in contact with many of our allies on the issue, and I can't give you any further details on individual cases.
Why now?
More than a year, like what took so long to repatriate these most recent Canadians and charge them with crimes under the
I'm just telling you that I can't give you further details, but of course I'm concerned with their health and safety. And as for when they arrive here, the questions should be also much more asked to my colleague, the Minister of Public Safety. So, je vais juste le faire en français, and yes, I'll answer Haiti, okay? Yes.
Would Canada be willing to work with the United States on an aid mission for Haiti?
So, there is a triple crisis happening in Haiti right now. A security one, a humanitarian one, and a political one. And so any decisions linked to Haiti must be taken into consideration what Haitians themselves think. So I've been saying we want to make sure we have solutions by and for Haitians. That's our goal. I've had many conversations with Tony Blinken about this. I will have more conversations about it with him. But also I've been in contact over even the last days with my colleagues from the CARICOM, so for example, Suriname, the Bahamas. And I will also raise the issue with Moussa Faki, the president of the African Union, who's in town today and tomorrow. So the goal is, at the end of the day, to find ways to help Haiti in the most effective way. And something that we haven't done yet, but that we will be working on, is certainly imposing strong sanctions on those who profit from violence. And so you saw at the United Nations the resolution about, from the Security Council regarding sanctioning particularly the head of the most important gang, which is has the certain, the nickname of barbecue, but obviously we want to do more also. So these are the things we're working on right now.
À propos d'Haïti,
Oui.
Oui, mais je vais quand même poser la question sur les deux sujets si ça dérange
Oui, il n'y a pas de problème.
Puis à propos de la visite de Blinken, qu'est-ce que vous espérez pour Haïti et pour la visite de Blinken en général? C'est quoi votre priorité? Et pour les Canadiens qui sont rapatriés de Syrie, est-ce que vous envisagez de changer la politique du gouvernement? Si vous vous préoccupez de tous les enfants qui sont...
OK. Donc, premièrement, sur la question d'Haïti, Haïti est la question de ce qui se passe à Haïti est vraiment une préoccupation pour moi. Il y a une crise présentement à 3 niveaux, au niveau de la sécurité, au niveau humanitaire puis au niveau politique. Et on ne va pas imposer une solution à Haïti, on va travailler avec les Haïtiens pour avoir une solution par et pour eux. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'on travaille, oui, avec les Haïtiens, mais avec plusieurs autres partenaires dans le monde, incluant certainement les pays de la région, comme les Bahamas, le Suriname, etc., mais aussi avec certains pays africains, dont le Rwanda et le Bénin. Donc, mon homologue, l'homologue du premier ministre, le président de l'Union africaine, est en ville aujourd'hui et demain, et on aura des conversations sur Haïti. Donc, le Canada est un de ces pays qui connaît bien la réalité d'Haïti et ce pays aussi qui, normalement, dans le monde, démontre le leadership d'amener d'autres pays pour pouvoir solutionner ce qui se passe à Haïti. Une des choses qu'on n'a toujours pas fait, ni le Canada, ni d'autres pays dans le monde, c'est d'imposer des sanctions. Et nous allons travailler ensemble pour imposer des sanctions. Parce que ceux qui profitent de la violence qui a lieu présentement dans les rues d'Haïti doivent être sanctionnés. Le Conseil de sécurité a déjà mentionné qu'il devait y avoir des sanctions sur le chef des gangs surnommé Barbecue, mais je pense qu'on doit aller plus loin et on va aller plus loin. Sur la question de ce qui se passe en Syrie, bien entendu, je suis très préoccupée par ce qui se passe dans les camps de détention. On est au courant qu'il y a des Canadiens qui sont détenus dans le nord-est de la Syrie. Je suis particulièrement préoccupée par la santé et, dans le fond, le bien-être des enfants qui sont dans ces camps-là. Alors, je ne peux pas vous donner de détails sur les cas particuliers, mais je suis cette question de très près et j'ai été en conversation tout au long de l'été avec plusieurs de nos alliés, dont les Américains et les Européens.
Et qu'est-ce que vous attendez de la visite du secrétaire Blinken, de votre priorité par rapport à ça?
Bien, c'est sûr que le but, c'est certainement d'approfondir cette amitié canadienne-américaine, de continuer encore et toujours de travailler ensemble sur plusieurs dossiers. Plus que jamais, on a besoin d'être unis, certainement lorsque vient la question de l'agression par la Russie de l'Ukraine, tout ce qui est en lien avec l'Iran, aussi certainement le dossier d'Haïti. Mais ce qu'on regarde en particulier aussi, c'est comment on va pouvoir travailler ensemble dans l'Indo-Pacifique. Merci. Yes, of course. It is indeed a very important visit. We want to further so we want to make sure that we deepen our ties with the Americans. We want to make sure that we collaborate on many issues, definitely Russia's aggression of Ukraine, Iran, everything linked also to the Indo-Pacific and China, and finally also Haiti. There are many important meetings that are happening in the coming weeks, from the G20 to the G7 to APEC. So it's time to sit down, organize ourselves in view of these important meetings where the world will be convened. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there other legal blocks for repatriating Canadians that are in these Syrian camps, most of them associated with ISIS? Are there other legal blockades to bringing them back to Canada to face?
Look, all of those situations are complex and depend on particular situations in particular countries and particular governments. What I can say to you is, from the Canadian perspective, we have the strongest set of anti-terrorism laws in the world. The person who has come back has been charged with very serious offenses, and she will have to face those charges in court. So I think, from my perspective as Minister of Justice in Canada, our system is working, and the person will obviously be able to defend herself against the charges, but from our perspective as Canadians, she has been charged with very serious charges, and we'll see how the case evolves. I'm not going to comment on any particular thing that may or may not happen.
Can you give us assurance that anyone who does come back from Syria will face charges that won't be people brought back to
Charges are always in the domain of the prosecution service in Canada. Either
bring back is not.
That is true, but the decisions, as you all know, as I know as Attorney General, decisions to prosecute in Canada are made independently, and they're based on the evidence that the RCMP and other police forces of jurisdiction would have. Thank you.
Concernant la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, lorsque vous l'avez évoquée, est-ce que vous jugez à ce moment-là que les policiers facilitaient le travail des manifestants? Pour vous,
Je vais comparaître devant la commission avec plaisir. On savait lorsque on était réunis pour prendre des décisions qu'il fallait avoir une commission de quoi que ce soit, une commission d'enquête après. Donc j'ai déjà répondu aux questions devant le comité parlementaire, et je vais répondre aux questions lorsque je suis devant la commission. Merci.
Look, I'm going to be there, so the commission wants to interview me. I'll be there.
Do you think it's right for a premier to claim parliamentary privilege to try and avoid testifying in an inquiry such as this one?
The process of setting up an inquiry is a critical element of ensuring that the utility of the Emergencies Act was done properly, and to also learn about the lessons learned. So I think the process is critical, and I think everyone should be able to participate in it.
Do you think it hampers the ability if we don't hear from the Premier? I mean, he's claiming parliamentary privilege. He's asking a judge to grant a stay so he doesn't have to testify. What do you think about that? And how does that impact the work of the Commission to get to the truth of the matter?
Well, I can say for our part that we're committed to full participation in the Commission. I think that we had an extraordinary circumstance here in Ottawa, and not just in Ottawa, but across the country, where we were seized by an illegal occupation that had a devastating impact on those that were affected. And it's extremely important that Canadians get all the answers about why the Act was needed to be used, why the decisions were made, and when they were made. And for our part, we're there to cooperate fully and participate fully in that process.
So when the Commission says in writing that they think that certain individuals would give vital testimony to give answers as to what happened, and those people choose not to participate, how does that affect the work of the Commission?
Well, I can only speak for our part, and when the Commission compels us to produce information or to attend, we will listen. We think it's vital that the Commission be able to do its work, and we will participate fully.
Okay, thanks very much.
Good morning.
What about Doug Ford not testifying at the Emergencies
I'm getting
Act?
asked this a lot.
And what do you think about it?
I think it'll play itself
Can
out.
you just come over here, just very quickly so we get on camera?
Sure, no, I think it will play itself out. I think, it is before the people it needs to be. He has opinions. Those opinions will play out, and we'll see what happens.
But do you think?
But I really don't, I can't comment on this.
But Mike Harris...
journalist to journalist, I'm just letting you know. I can't comment on this right now.
You always could. I mean, you could talk about how you feel about whether the Premier of a province in one of the bigger crises that we've had in recent memory should be testifying just in general.
I think he and his team will work out what needs to be done, and I think the Commission will do the same, and we'll see where it lands. I'll tell you, I'll have a lot more to comment on after this all plays out, but I do think it's important to let the process run its course. I do think that's fair.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask you about the Bloc leader saying that when he swore oath to the Queen, it wasn't sincere? Do you think that he should be prevented from sitting in the House? It seems your colleagues aren't agreeing.
Well, I think the Speaker ruled on that, and that's the ruling by the Speaker. I think that speaks to his credibility. He was elected by his constituents, and but if he's not sincere about that, what is he sincere about in the rest of his dealings with his constituents?
Is it very reasonable to ask for someone to be sincere and, like, for an elected leader to be sincere when they do this?
Well, I can really only speak to myself. I'm a lawyer, and so when we swear oaths, we mean it. And in the courtroom, when you swear an oath and you then lie about it, there are criminal consequences for that. And so this is far more of a political issue. And again, if he's not being sincere to himself, and that's what you're doing when you're taking an oath, either as an affirmation or swearing an oath before a higher power, before a God, you're taking a significant step. And so if there is no sincerity there, there's really no sincerity to his constituents. He's been elected by his constituents. His constituents have spoken, and the Speaker has ruled he should sit as a member of the House of Commons.
What do you think about Doug Ford fighting the summons?
I've been public about that. I think there'd be a lot of conservatives shocked if the Prime Minister invoked parliamentary privilege. I think it's further shocking that he's claiming that the business of Parliament, the business of the legislature will be impacted if he's required to testify on November 10th. The legislature isn't sitting on November 10th. I think people have a lot of questions. I think the Premier of Ontario should stand up and answer them. Thank you so much.
Mr. McKay, do you think that Doug Ford should be testifying at the Emergencies Act inquiry? Yes. What do you think about him deciding to ask for a judicial review, claiming parliamentary privilege to avoid testifying?
It strikes me he's trying to duck his responsibilities.
And is there any at all avenue in which they could make this work to get him to testify, or is the privilege, as you understand it, enough to make sure that he won't?
I'm not familiar with the terms and conditions of the inquiry. Seems to me that he has a political responsibility to show up and explain his actions, just as the Prime Minister does, just as the Mayor did.
How does this affect the work of the inquiry then, if Premier Ford and then Solicitor General Sylvia Jones aren't able to actually testify?
I would assume the contra preferendum rule would apply, which is the interpretation will go against the Premier and the Deputy Premier.
Thanks very much.
All those that were involved should be present, at least to give their version of the view, and I think that's what the point of the commission was.
Is it right to claim privilege and go to court over this? I mean, it seems like extreme measures.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're claiming over there, but I mean, I just think that at some point somebody, at least somebody from Ontario government should be there presenting on behalf of the Ontario government. Thanks.
Le chef du Bloc et son serment d'allégeance à la reine qui n'était pas sincère, pensez-vous qu'il aurait dû se faire dire depuis, c'est pas clair, excusez-moi, pensez-vous, vous, qu'il ne devrait plus pouvoir siéger?
Ben, je sais que ça occupe beaucoup de gens. Moi, ce qui m'occupe, c'est de mes soins de santé, de prendre soin des gens qui ont besoin d'aide partout au Canada. Et c'est là-dessus que je veux comprendre.
Mais selon vous, un député qui dit que son serment d'allégeance n'était pas sincère. Un député comme M. Blanchet qui a avoué ouvertement que son serment à la reine n'était pas sincère doit être expulsé. Il peut siéger quand même.
Je vous dirais, là, c'est pas une priorité. C'est pas une priorité pour les Québécois et les Canadiens.
C'est votre parti qui a amené ça sur le tapis. Il a dit que M. Blanchet, vu que son serment, il a dit que c'était pas sincère, son serment à la reine, quand il a été élu, il devrait être expulsé, il ne devrait pas pouvoir siéger.
Écoutez, je vais laisser M. Blanchet avec ses dires. Je pense que ça lui appartient. Puis
vous, étiez-vous à l'aise de prêter serment?
C'est-vous sincère? Moi, j'étais à l'aise. Quand j'ai été élue, là, j'ai prêté serment au départ pour les Gaspésiens puis les Madelinots. Pour eux, c'est ma première priorité. Puis par la suite, en étant nommée ministre, bien, ça a été comme ministre du Revenu. C'était, je pensais, à tous les Canadiens. Puis après ça, ben, venait le serment à la reine. Fait que j'ai fait le serment à la reine.
Puis étiez-vous à l'aise de faire le serment à la reine?
Je vous dirais que quand je me lève le matin, là, depuis 2015, je pense pas à ça.
Mais vous n'avez pas l'air de déborder d'enthousiasme.
hier là-dessus. Ben,
Moi, j'étais pas là.
Ah, vous étiez pas là.
Non, puis depuis, je pense que depuis, il y a votre parti qui a dit que M. Blanchet ne devrait pas pouvoir siéger parce qu'il n'était pas sincère. Donc là-dessus, pensez-vous qu'il devrait siéger?
Je pense que M. Blanchet a à répondre auprès de ses commettants.
Une question pour vous, là. Quand vous avez prêté serment à la reine, étiez-vous sincère?
Oui, toujours.
Can I just
Merci
ask you, as
beaucoup.
Minister of Northern Affairs and you deal with indigenous communities, can I just ask you, do you think that the swearing to the Queen or King should be optional?
I think it's an important question. I think certainly it's something that each MP has to take into consideration, and the MP has to do what feels good, right to them.
But it's mandatory right now, so they can't really do what they think is right.
I think that's a discussion it's an important discussion, should be had with MPs at the appropriate committee. Merci
So you would
beaucoup.
be open to making it
Merci.
Comme chaque fois qu'on discute les mercredis, on a une politique très très claire au Parti libéral.
Pouvez-vous la clarifier?
Encore une fois, oui. S'il s'agit d'une motion de confiance, un élément de notre plateforme électorale, ou en ce qui a trait aux chartes des droits et libertés, on tient rigueur aux députés, mais à part de ça, ce sont des votes libres.
Juste avant que vous partiez, M. Blanchet, est-ce qu'il devrait pouvoir continuer de siéger malgré son serment pas sincère?
Je pense que c'est dans les mains du président.
Vous, votre serment était-il sincère?
Moi, quand je prête serment, c'est toujours sincère.
Father Blanchet should be prevented from sitting in the House because his swearing to the Queen was not genuine, not sincere.
Wasn't sincere?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
You think he should be kicked out?
I don't think he should be sitting in the House when he wasn't true to the commitment that he made.
Thanks.
Étiez-vous sincère quand vous l'avez prêté ce serment à la reine?
Doutez-vous que de ma sincérité?
Je pose la question.
Évidemment, j'étais sincère.
On doute de votre allégeance à la Queen.
Quebec says that they'll accept the conditions that you placed on them yesterday. Do you have any response to that?
Can you repeat so?
Quebec says that they'll accept the conditions you placed on the deal yesterday. What's your response?
Well, you know, my only concern is to make sure that I would have, better prices for Canadians when it comes to wireless telecom. It's a good thing that they listen to me because actually, I am the one who at the end will have to decide whether we transfer the license or not. We'll let the competition process to go forward, because if they, depending on the conclusion they reach, I will have to make a decision after. But I think it's a good thing because, two things I said which is basic, and I've always been very clear to them, is that first I want anyone who's going to take these licenses to be there for the long run. And in this case, I want them to extend the lower rates we've seen in Quebec. We know the rates are about 20% lower in Ontario and Western Canada because my only concern is to be offering better prices for Canadians when it comes to wireless services. And so it's better to be clear from the get-go, and I hope they listen.
Si Québécois accepte, donc le deal va aller de l'avant, là?
Non, non, parce que, oui, ben là, alors, il y a trois aspects à ça. Il y a eu le CRTC, il y a tout le processus de la concurrence. Si le bureau de la concurrence dit non, c'est la fin. Mais si la concurrence dit oui, ben là, moi, je dis, comme je l'ai dit la dernière fois quand on avait le transfert des licences de Charles Rogers, à l'époque, vous vous rappelez, j'avais dit, je ne permettrai pas que l'ensemble des licences soient transférées. Ça, ce chapitre-là, on l'a clos.
Mais si
là, le nouveau
accepte
chapitre
les
est là.
conditions...
Ben, écoutez, c'est des conditions, moi, je appelais essentielles. Maintenant, on va regarder les autres conditions qu'il pourrait y avoir à ce moment-là, mais ce qui est important pour moi, ça, c'est deux conditions qui sont très essentielles parce que d'abord, moi, je veux m'assurer que celui qui va reprendre les licences va être là pour le long terme. Hein, on parle minimum 10 ans. Puis deuxièmement, ce que je veux surtout m'assurer, c'est que les tarifs qui sont plus bas au Québec, en moyenne, c'est 20% plus bas au Québec, que ces tarifs-là soient appliqués en Ontario et évidemment dans l'ouest du pays.
Le fait qu'ils acceptent ces conditions-là, ça...
Mais je pense que c'est pour les consommateurs une bonne nouvelle, une bonne chose qu'ils m'écoutent parce qu'à la fin, ils auront besoin de mon autorisation éventuellement pour transférer les licences. Et l'objectif derrière tout ça, c'est d'envoyer un message clair aux compagnies de télécommunications que depuis le départ, moi, j'essaie de faire baisser les prix. Hein, on est en période d'inflation. L'idée, c'est de faire baisser les prix. Et ça, ben, c'est une affaire qui va dans ce sens-là.
Bon, premièrement, sur Hockey Canada, est-ce que vous avez une réaction au fait qu'ils annulent les frais d'adhésion de quelques dollars, cette histoire-là?
Excuse-moi, est-ce que tu peux répéter ta question, s'il te plaît?
Hockey Canada qui annule les frais d'adhésion de 3 $ par joueur. qui sont liés à ce dossier que je ne maîtrise pas, puis que les sports maîtrisent.
OK. Mais ça, c'est une nouvelle là, que je viens d'apprendre avec vous.
Okay.
Donc, c'est une décision de Hockey Canada.
Parfait. Au niveau de la sécurité des ministres, vous savez que les menaces sont de plus en plus virulentes. Comment vous sentez-vous? La GRC dit qu'elle fait face à une pénurie d'agents de protection. Comment vous sentez-vous en tant que ministre?
Ben, je trouve ça préoccupant du climat social puis de ce qui se passe au Canada. Le fait qu'on en soit rendu à se poser ces questions-là, je trouve que c'est important pour moi comme députée quand je m'en vais pouvoir parler avec mes commettants puis pouvoir parler avec les gens. En même temps, c'est important que la sécurité des élus soit tenue en compte. Donc, on va suivre les développements de ce côté-là.
Vous, votre serment d'allégeance à la reine était-il sincère?
Ben, écoutez, je suis fière de représenter les gens de ma circonscription puis de siéger au sein du Parlement.
Juste pour finir là-dessus, ce sera vraiment pas long. Pensez-vous, vous, que M. Blanchet devrait être empêché de siéger parce que c'était pas sincère?
Non, M. Blanchet a été élu par ses concitoyens, puis il y a un service à accomplir en Chambre, puis c'est des élections démocratiques. Donc, pour moi, M. Blanchet a sa place.
Sur le Canada, les athlètes demandent une enquête indépendante. Ils disent que si vous confiez ça au nouveau commissaire, ça ne sera pas suffisant. Est-ce que vous répondez aux athlètes qui disent que ça prend une enquête indépendante?
Ben, premièrement, ça fait des mois que j'ai des discussions avec des gymnastes qui me racontent les situations horribles qu'elles ont vécues, parce qu'en grande majorité, ce sont des jeunes filles pendant qu'elles pratiquaient la gymnastique dans leurs clubs locaux, provinciaux, puis parfois aussi à l'échelle nationale, qui ont vécu des situations absolument horribles d'abus, puis je trouve ça... Ça brise le cœur d'entendre ces histoires-là et je souhaite absolument qu'il y ait une enquête indépendante qui puisse traiter ces dossiers-là. Maintenant, on a mis en place un organisme indépendant qui s'appelle le Bureau de la commissaire à l'intégrité dans le sport, qui a le mandat et qui est une solution permanente pour la gymnastique, mais tous les sports au Canada, qui sont soutenus par le gouvernement fédéral, d'avoir des enquêtes indépendantes dans le cas d'abus, de mauvais traitements et de harcèlement. Donc, et je comprends qu'il y a des préoccupations par rapport au bureau présentement et on travaille pour donner plus de pouvoir au bureau, notamment quand on parle des subpoénas et tout ça.
Donc pour vous, l'enquête indépendante passe par la commission et la nouvelle commissaire et pas par quelqu'un extérieur à ça?
Bien, tu sais, le bureau de la commissaire à l'intégrité dans le sport, c'est une demande qui nous est venue depuis des années de la part des athlètes.
À propos de la demande spécifique de Gymnastique Canada qui dit que ça nous prend une enquête indépendante maintenant, pas attendre la commissaire.
La commissaire à l'intégrité dans le sport, c'est une organisation puis une solution permanente qu'on a mis en place pour les cas individuels d'abus, autant passés que futurs, et aussi pour que l'organisation puisse faire des enquêtes sur la culture dans un sport. Donc, c'est la solution permanente qui a été mise en place et j'encourage les discussions à se poursuivre là, pour que cette enquête-là ait lieu. Yes. Well, first of all, I've been in contact with many gymnasts for the past few weeks and months, and the stories that we've heard about their situations of abuse or maltreatment in their sport, at all levels, sometimes it's at local clubs, provincial clubs, or national level, I have to say that it's totally heartbreaking and extremely disturbing. But like the story in Hockey Canada, there's need to be a collective response to this because it's at all levels. We've created the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner. It wasn't asked by athletes in multiple sports that they have an independent mechanism. And yes, it's funded by the federal government, just like any court of justice that is supported financially by the federal government, but it's still an independent entity. And this is a permanent solution so that athletes have somewhere to address their cases of abuse and maltreatment, whether it's individual complaints or cultural sport assessments. So I want this independent investigation to happen, and I do believe that the office is a proper place for this investigation to take place.
Why do you think that that's a better place in the courts? The gymnasts are asking for a judicial inquiry into what happened.
Well, for every cases of, for example, sexual abuse or cases that belong in front of the criminal justice court or in front of civil tribunals, and there are cases right now that are being tried in civic tribunals across the country on the provincial level. So that's always going to stand. For sure, when people have lived situations of sexual abuse, it needs to go through the traditional court system. But in regards to harassment, abuse, and all those other cases, or cultural assessment when there's a larger or broader problem in a sport, just like we're hearing about in gymnastics, then the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner can do those investigations, sanction, and recommendations. So, and this is a permanent solution that was asked by athletes.
But she says there's a difference in she says there's
Satisfied when you went to the AIDS conference with the level of security they offered?
Well, first of all, it was just regrettable that in Canada that it's come to this situation where, you know, that ministers and other people need more security because of what's going on. And I'll be very frank on this. Have certain leaders actually to kind of push and promote certain people who actually promote some of this violence is actually extremely disappointing.
Yeah, so are you satisfied with the services you're getting?
I just wanted to speak to you about the new stats from the Statistics Canada, the census. They talked about Canada having now a record number of foreign-born citizens, 26%, but also about their difficulty in finding employment in Canada. I wonder if you
well, look, I think it should come as no surprise that we've embraced immigration as a growth strategy in Canada, and it's something we need to continue to push for. I'm firmly of the view that it's essential from both an economic and a demographic point of view. We've had one of the strongest economic recoveries of any developed nation in the world from COVID-19, 115% of the jobs that have returned, GDP in advance of pre-pandemic levels. We've recently hit the lowest all-time unemployment rate. But a couple of months ago, there was 1 million jobs empty in the Canadian economy. We've seen immigration be responsible for nearly 100% of our labor force growth over the last couple of years, and we can't fill all those jobs in the economy without embracing immigration as a growth strategy. In addition to needing to get people here to fill jobs that are available now, which actually protects the jobs of Canadians, by the way, who are working for businesses that have been through a heck of a difficult couple of years, we also have a demographic issue that we need to address. 50 years ago, we had 7 workers for a retired person in Canada. We're closer to 3 today. In my region, in Atlantic Canada, that number's about 2. We're losing in my region of the country 10 workers for every 7 that join every year. We need to continue to embrace immigration if we're going to not just be having avoid not just having conversations about a labor shortage, but 30 years from now paying for schools and hospitals and sustaining basic social services that we take for granted. What we do see, to the second part of your question, is across a generation, the descendants of newcomers have the same economic outcomes of people who've been here for many generations. We need to continue to do more, particularly on credential recognition, and that's a partnership that we need to work on with provincial governments, by the way, to make sure that people who do come here have the ability to work in their profession. When we actually see provinces that address that issue and we can recruit people to fill gaps in the labor force, the contributions that they make to Canada is extraordinary. We're going to remain one of the most welcoming countries on earth, and we need to continue to push the envelope to make sure those that we welcome here to become citizens are set up for success, because it's in all our interest to make sure that that's the outcome that they achieve.
And until that credentials system gets fixed, are you concerned ever that there's a mismatch between the kind of immigrants our point system brings in, highly qualified people, and those million jobs that we're talking about, which are typically not so?
Look, I am so excited about one of the changes that we made in the Budget Implementation Act that the House of Commons passed in June. There's a fundamental shift to Canada's express entry system, and I expect that the new authorities are going to be available sometime this year, or in probably spring of 2023, perhaps mid-year. It's going to allow us not just to select people based on the CRS score that they receive through the immigration system, but we're actually going to be able to do a targeted draw that focuses on the sectors with the greatest demand in the regions where there is the greatest demand. So if we want to have French language early childhood educators in New Brunswick, nurses in Nova Scotia, or skilled tradespeople in Ontario, we'll be able to do specific draws for people that meet those definitions. This is going to allow us to overcome the challenge that you quite rightly pointed out of not just bringing in people who have high human capital scores, but actually reflect the needs of our communities. This is an extraordinary opportunity. There's more we can do as well. The last federal budget set aside $115 million just for foreign credential recognition programs for healthcare workers. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment, but if we continue to be the world world leader when it comes to immigration as a growth strategy, which we are hands down, by the way. We're growing our population at the fastest rate that it's ever grown, and at twice the rate, nearly twice the rate of our G7 counterparts. This is our competitive advantage in Canada. We're going to continue to do everything we can to make sure that we meet the needs of newcomers, but allow newcomers to help us meet the needs of Canada.
And on a separate matter, I just want to ask about the citizenship status of children born in Syria who want to be are they automatically Canadian citizens? Is there a process that they have to go through? Are there cases where a child born in Syria is their mother?
There's a really detailed answer to this question, and it depends on certain factors about how the parent may have achieved citizenship. If the parent was born in Canada, their descendants automatically can benefit from citizenship. There's an issue that we're working on right now to make sure that where a child who is born to a Canadian parent outside of Canada then has children of their own, to make sure that there's a process to consider the second generation person when and their citizenship status when in fact that person's parent has a long-standing historical tie to the country. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about right now, but to answer your question specifically, I'd have to know the individual circumstances on the nature of how the person gains citizenship in the parent and that dynamic. Okay, thanks so much everyone.